The human who saved the younger alien now, the elder claims he's hers by law. The twin suns of Vaelora burned low across the violet sky, painting the alien forest in shades of silver and blue. Ethan Ward, a human engineer from a lost Earth colony, stumbled through the glowing undergrowth, clutching a damaged scanner in his hand. His ship had crashed hours ago, torn apart by an unexpected storm of energy that no human machine could predict. Now he was stranded, surrounded by a world that hummed with strange life and beauty. Every tree shimmered as if it were alive, glowing softly under the touch of the evening wind. The air tasted like metal and honey, a mix that made him dizzy. But what drew his attention most was the faint cry echoing through the forest, a voice. Soft, frightened, and unfamiliar, he froze, listening. Heart pounding. It wasn't human. Yet it wasn't a sound made by any animal he knew. Someone was calling for help. Without thinking, Ethan ran toward the sound, pushing through glowing vines that wrapped around his boots. He followed the cries until he saw it a small, crashed hovercraft, half buried in molten soil, flames licking its sides. Inside, trapped under a twisted beam, was a young alien girl. Her skin shone like moonlight, silver with faint streaks of blue. Her long hair spread across the burning floor like silk, her eyes large, violet, and Bright met his for a single second, filled with fear and pain. Ethan dropped his scanner and rushed forward, pulling at the beam with all his strength. The metal burned his hands. The heat was unbearable, but he didn't stop. She gasped something in her language, a warning maybe, but he only said, "Hold on, I've got you." With one final pull, the beam came loose, and she fell forward into his arms. Light as glass, the flames grew higher, and he carried her out of the wreck, stumbling through the glowing ash until they reached the edge of the forest. He laid her gently on the soft blue moss. His lungs burning, his arms trembling, she looked at him with disbelief. Whispering something softly, his translator chip couldn't catch all of it. But one word came through clearly. "Why?" Ethan smiled weakly. "Because you needed help." Before he could ask her name, a strange vibration filled the air, a hum that made the trees tremble. From above, golden ships descended silently. Shaped like wings of light, Ethan shielded his eyes as a dozen tall alien figures stepped out, wearing armor that shimmered with living energy. They bowed before the injured girl, and then their faces turned toward him. Cold and sharp, their leader spoke, his voice deep and musical. "Human male." "Step back from the princess," Ethan blinked. "Princess?" He looked at the girl in shock, realizing the truth. The one he had saved wasn't just anyone, she was royalty. Her name was Princess Leora, youngest daughter of the Sarai Empire. Rulers of Vaelora, the guards surrounded him, weapons glowing. He tried to explain. "I was just helping her. She was trapped," but they didn't answer, their eyes full of something that looked like fear or anger. Leora struggled to sit up, her voice soft but firm. "No. Stop, he saved me." The guards hesitated, exchanging uncertain looks. Then another voice spoke, smooth as silk and sharp as glass. Out of the largest ship stepped a woman, taller than the rest, her silver armor engraved with royal symbols. Her face was calm but cold, her eyes glowing faintly with psychic power. Every alien around her lowered their heads. Leora's face paled. "Sister?" she whispered. Ethan turned, realizing who this must be. High Princess Sereth, the elder sister, ruler of the royal line. Her gaze moved over him slowly, studying every inch. "So, this is the human who dared touch royal blood," she said quietly, her tone neither kind nor cruel. Ethan straightened his back, trying to stay calm. "I didn't dare anything, I just saved her life." A few guards gasped at his tone, shocked that a mere human spoke so boldly. But Sereth only smiled slightly, like a predator amused by its prey. "Do you know our law, human?" she asked, stepping closer, her eyes glowing faintly. Ethan shook his head, confused. "Law? What law?" Sereth stopped in front of him, her presence cold and overwhelming. She looked at her sister, then back at him. "In the empire of the Sarai, all that belongs to the younger sister belongs first to the elder." Her words echoed in the air like thunder. Leora gasped. "Sister, no, he's not." But Sereth raised a hand, silencing her. "That means," Sereth continued, her voice now soft but final, "if you saved her life, then by law, you belong to me." Ethan stared at her in disbelief. "Belong to you? That's insane." Sereth tilted her head slightly. "Maybe, but that is our way. Human." Her eyes glimmered like stars reflecting off ice. "And from this moment, you are mine?" Leora tried to speak again, her voice trembling. "Please, sister, he didn't know. He doesn't understand our customs." But Sarath's gaze stayed fixed on Ethan. Unreadable, finally, she turned to her guards. "Take him to the palace, unharmed," she said softly. "I will decide what to do with him." As they led Ethan away, he looked back one last time at Leora. She tried to reach for him, but Sarath's hand rested gently on her shoulder. The younger princess froze, tears shining in her eyes. Above them, the twin suns vanished behind dark clouds, and the forest dimmed. Ethan didn't know it yet, but the simple act of saving one life had just broken one of the oldest laws in the galaxy. And as the story begins, dear listener, if you enjoy tales of humans standing against impossible odds, of courage, mystery, and alien worlds, then gently subscribe to this channel, because this is only the beginning, and what comes next will change everything. The air inside the Sarai royal palace felt heavy and alive. Every wall shimmered with faint silver light, as if the entire structure was breathing. Ethan Ward stood in the center of a massive hall, his wrists no longer bound, but still watched by guards who carried weapons that hummed with silent energy. His heart pounded, his mind spinning with confusion. He had saved a life, and somehow that made him someone's property. The alien guards spoke in a language he didn't understand, their voices cold and mechanical. They kept glancing at him, as though he were something strange, a creature not meant to exist here. He wanted to shout, to ask what was happening, but the look in their glowing eyes told him not to. Finally, a door opened ahead, tall and bright, and a familiar face stepped through Princess Leora, the girl he had saved. She rushed toward him, her silver hair flowing like water, her violet eyes full of emotion. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head. "No, I'm fine, but what is going on? Why am I here?" She looked down, her hands shaking slightly. "You broke one of our oldest laws, even if you didn't mean to." Ethan frowned. "By saving you?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, on our world, any life saved becomes the responsibility and the possession of the Savior's elder bloodline." He stared at her, speechless. "So because you're the younger sister, your older sister thinks she owns me?" Leora nodded again, sadness in her eyes. "She doesn't just think it, Ethan. She has the right." Before he could say another word, the great doors opened once more. A wave of cool energy swept through the room, and High Princess Sereth entered, her presence filling the space like thunder in the distance. Every guard bowed, their heads low. Even Leora stepped back slightly. Ethan stood still, refusing to bow, his heart racing. Sarath's steps were slow and deliberate, her armor gleaming like the inside of a star. Her silver eyes studied him carefully, not with cruelty, but with curiosity. "So," she said softly, "the human remains defiant even in my presence." Her tone was calm, but every word carried power. Ethan met her gaze. I don't kneel to anyone, he said quietly. I'm not a thing to be owned. The guards stiffened. One of them whispered in shock. But Sereth simply smiled, faint and sharp. Interesting, she murmured. No fear. No submission, just defiance. She circled him slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. Tell me, human, why did you risk your life for my sister? Ethan turned to follow her movements. Because she needed help. It's that simple. Sereth stopped, looking into his eyes. Simple, you say? She whispered. You humans think saving others has no price. But on Vaelora, every action has weight. Every bond has law. Leora took a step forward. Sister, please, he didn't know. Let him go. Sereth glanced at her younger sibling. Her tone soft, but warning. You are too kind, Leora. Kindness without wisdom is weakness. Then she looked back at Ethan. You will stay within my palace, under my protection. Until I decide your place. Ethan's jaw tightened. And if I refuse? Her smile grew colder. Then you will learn what happens to those who refuse royal law. The guards moved closer, but she raised a hand to stop them. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. Do not mistake me for a monster, human. I only follow the code that has guided our people for millennia. He stared at her, anger flickering behind his eyes. Then maybe your code is wrong. The silence that followed was deep and sharp. No one had ever spoken to High Princess Sereth like that before. For a moment, her expression didn't change. Then, slowly, she laughed a quiet, chilling sound. You are reckless, she said. But I like that. Turning to her guards, she ordered, Take him to my private chambers? Leora's eyes widened. Sister, that's forbidden. Sereth didn't look back. And it's a fitting place for a forbidden human. As Ethan was led through the halls, he noticed the palace around him shimmered with energy lines, thin streams of light that pulsed through walls like veins. Alien servants stared as he passed, whispering to each other. Some looked frightened, others curious. One of them, a tall, silent male, muttered softly, The prophecy begins again. Ethan caught the words but didn't understand. Inside Sarath's private chamber, everything glowed softly. A garden of silver flowers floated mid-air. Light rippling across water that hung without gravity, Sereth entered behind him, removing her armor piece by piece until she stood in elegant royal robes. You will stay here, she said, not as a slave. Not yet, but as something I wish to understand. Ethan turned to face her. Understand? She nodded slowly. Your kind was wiped from most star systems centuries ago. Humans were said to be primitive and emotional. Yet you saved my sister without fear. Why? He shrugged. Because that's what we do. Sereth tilted her head. Strange. You act as though compassion is strength, not weakness. He took a step closer, meeting her gaze again. Where I come from. It's both. For the first time, Sarath's expression softened. Almost invisible, but real. She turned away quickly, hiding it behind calm authority. Rest, human. Tomorrow I will decide your future, she said. Her tone was final, but her voice carried a trace of something new, uncertainty. As the doors closed behind her, Ethan looked out across the alien city beyond the crystal windows. Towering spires touched the clouds. Ships drifted like glowing fish through the sky. Somewhere far below, he could still hear Leora's voice faintly calling his name, and high above, hidden among the stars, massive ships gathered preparing for something unseen. He didn't know yet, but his arrival had started a storm that would shake the empire itself. In the distance, Sereth stood on her balcony, watching him from afar, her hands clenched around a small crystal that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. For the first time in her long life, she felt something dangerous, something forbidden. Not anger, not power, but curiosity mixed with something deeper. And she whispered to the wind, Human, you might be the one thing this law cannot control. The first morning on Vaelora came with a pale silver sunrise that filled the royal palace with quiet light. Ethan Ward awoke in a chamber larger than any room he had ever seen, its walls made of crystal that sang softly with every passing breeze. The bed beneath him felt weightless, woven from some living fabric that pulsed with warmth. For a moment, he thought it was a dream, but the distant hum of alien energy reminded him of where he truly was. A prisoner, or worse, someone's property. He sat up slowly, his thoughts heavy. Outside his window, the alien city of Vaelora stretched endlessly, with floating gardens, glowing rivers, and towers that reached into the clouds. It was beautiful. But he couldn't ignore the feeling of being trapped within a golden cage. A soft chime echoed, and the door slid open without sound, revealing a tall alien servant with eyes that reflected blue light. "Human Ethan," the servant said in a calm voice. "Her Highness requests your presence in the observation hall." Ethan sighed, rubbing his face. "Of course she does." He followed the servant through corridors of glowing stone and whispering voices. Every alien they passed stared at him, some with disgust, others with fascination. He could hear fragments of their whispers. The human who defied the princes, the outsider who broke the law, the prophecy. That last word kept repeating in the air like an echo. When the doors of the observation hall opened, Sereth was already waiting. She stood near a window that showed the twin suns rising over her empire. Her long silver robe shimmered like liquid moonlight, her hair braided in thin glowing strands that moved with her heartbeat. Without turning, she spoke softly. "You did not kneel yesterday, even when you knew who I was." Ethan stopped a few steps away from her. "I told you, I don't kneel to anyone." Finally, she turned, her gaze calm but sharp as ice. "And if I commanded you to?" she asked, her tone neither cruel nor kind. Ethan crossed his arms. "Then I'd still say no." For a moment, silence filled the vast room, heavy enough to stop the air. Sereth studied him closely, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "You are either very brave or very foolish," she said quietly. Ethan met her gaze. "Maybe both." Her lips curved slightly, a hint of a smile, gone before it could form. "Tell me," she said, walking closer, "what does your kind believe in, if not obedience?" "Choice," Ethan said simply. "We believe no one owns another person, no matter how powerful they are." Sereth stopped a breath away, her eyes searching his. "You speak like you are free, but you are in my palace, surrounded by my laws." Ethan didn't flinch. "Maybe, but I still choose who I am." Something flickered in her eyes, a strange emotion she quickly buried. "Interesting," she whispered, and turned toward a table where alien crystals floated above holographic maps. Ethan followed her gaze. Strange symbols, star roots, and ship patterns filled the air. "What is all that?" he asked. She looked back over her shoulder. "War." The word hit him like a shock. "War?" he repeated. Sereth nodded slowly. "A rebellion grows on the outer colonies. They question my rule. They say the royal bloodline has become weak." She touched one of the glowing points on the map, and an image flickered. Ships gathering, planets burning. "Perhaps they are right," she whispered. "Ever since the prophecy returned," Ethan frowned. "You keep saying prophecy. What does it mean?" Sereth's eyes darkened. "Long ago, our ancestors wrote that a stranger from beyond the stars, a man of flesh and fire, would arrive and bring the fall of the eldest and the rise of the youngest." Ethan's heart skipped. "And you think that's me?" She didn't answer, but the silence told him enough. Before he could speak again, the door burst open. Vaelora rushed in, her hair glowing with urgency, her voice trembling. "Sister, stop this madness. He's not part of your prophecy." Sarath's expression hardened. Leora, this does not concern you. Leora ignored her and turned to Ethan. She's using you, Ethan. She doesn't care about your freedom. She only wants to see if the legend is true. Ethan looked between them, confusion mixing with anger. What legend? Leora's voice broke. That if the elder sister falls for the outsider, the Empire will burn. The room went silent. Sarath's face turned to stone, her voice a low whisper. Enough. But Leora didn't stop. You can't hide it, sister. You already feel it. You're breaking your own law. Ethan could see it now, the tension in Sarath's eyes. The flicker of conflict she tried to hide behind power. Sarath raised her hand, and psychic light rippled through the room, making the walls hum. Leave us, she ordered. Her tone shaking slightly. Leora hesitated, then whispered, Be careful, Ethan, before running out. When the doors closed, Sarath exhaled slowly, her hands trembling just enough for him to notice. I should have her punished, she said softly. But she speaks the truth, doesn't she? Ethan didn't answer. Sarath stepped closer again. Her eyes locked on his. I don't know what you've done to me. Human, she whispered, but you make me question everything I was taught to believe. He took a breath. Unsure whether to speak or move. Maybe, he said quietly. You're not the only one. Outside, thunder rolled through the sky. Though there were no clouds, the palace lights flickered, and alarms began to echo in the distance. Sarath looked up sharply. What now? A guard rushed in, breathless. Your Highness, the Queen's fleet has arrived early. She demands to see the human at once. Sarath froze, her calm mask breaking for the first time. The Queen Mother, she whispered. She was not supposed to return yet. Ethan watched her expression shift between fear and resolve. Why does she want to see me? He asked. Sarath turned toward him, her voice low. Because she believes you are the weapon that will destroy us all. She stepped forward and placed her hand over his chest. Do not speak unless I tell you to, she whispered, her eyes glowing brighter than ever. And no matter what happens, do not show fear. Ethan nodded slowly. Why? Sarath's lips curved into a faint, tragic smile. Because. Human, she said softly. On Vaelora, fear is the first thing they take from you before they make you theirs. As she led him through the shining halls toward the throne chamber, every step echoed like a countdown. The Queen was waiting, and with her, the next storm that would decide not just Ethan's fate, but the future of an entire empire. The throne chamber of the Sarai Palace was not a room. It was a universe of light and silence. Columns of silver crystal stretched into infinity, and the air shimmered with the hum of psychic power. Ethan Ward stood in the center, his heartbeat echoing louder than any sound around him. Beside him, High Princess Sarath stood tall, her expression calm, but her eyes burned with unease. Ahead, on a raised platform of living light, sat the Queen Mother, ruler of Vaelora, her silver crown floating above her head like a small sun. The Queen's gaze pierced through him like a blade, her voice deep and cold. So, this is the human who defied my law, she said. Her words rippled through the air, each one vibrating with power. Ethan tried to speak, but Sarath's hand tightened slightly, a silent warning. He stayed quiet, his fists clenched at his sides. The Queen rose slowly, her long robe trailing across the glowing floor. Her presence was overwhelming, as if gravity itself bent around her. She circled Ethan like a predator, studying unfamiliar prey. Tell me, human, she said softly, what gives you the right to interfere with royal blood? Ethan looked up, his voice steady. I saw someone in danger, and I helped. That's all. The Queen's expression turned colder. And yet, your act of mercy has shaken the balance of my empire. Leora stood behind the throne, her eyes wide and fearful. She wanted to speak, but one glare from her mother silenced her. Sereth stepped forward, her tone respectful but firm. "Mother, he meant no harm. He saved Leora out of compassion. Nothing more." The queen turned toward her elder daughter. "Compassion," she repeated the word as if it were poison. "You speak like one who has forgotten the law of blood." "My daughter," Sereth bowed her head slightly, "I have not forgotten. But I have seen something different in him." The queen's voice sharpened. "Different or dangerous?" The question cut through the hall. Sereth didn't answer. Ethan could feel the tension in the air like a storm waiting to break. Finally, the queen raised her hand, and the guards stepped forward. "Take him to the deep vaults," she ordered. "We will see what secrets lie inside this human." Before Ethan could move, Sarad's hand lifted, glowing with psychic fire. "Wait," she said sharply. "If you harm him, you break your own law. For he is under my protection." The queen's eyes narrowed. "You challenge me, Sereth?" Sarath's voice didn't waver. "I uphold our code." The queen's lips curved into a cold smile. "Then keep your pets safe. But know this, he will be the cause of your downfall." The words struck like thunder. Ethan was pulled away by guards, taken through dark corridors beneath the palace. Sarath followed in silence until they reached the edge of the restricted chambers. When the guards left, she stepped closer, her tone low, urgent. "You should have stayed silent," she said, her voice trembling with anger and worry. "You don't understand what you've done." Ethan looked at her, confusion mixing with frustration. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said. "I just refuse to bow to someone who treats people like property." Sereth closed her eyes for a moment. Exhaling slowly, "You speak of freedom as if it is something everyone deserves," she said softly. "But here, freedom is a myth." Ethan's voice grew firm. "Then maybe it's time someone proves it isn't." Her eyes snapped open, glowing brighter for a heartbeat. The psychic energy around them pulsed with her emotions, making the air vibrate. "Your words are dangerous," she whispered, "but they make me feel alive." Ethan took a cautious step closer. "Then maybe danger is what your world needs." For a moment, they stood inches apart, the glow of the palace lights reflecting off their faces. Neither spoke, but the silence said everything. The forbidden bond had begun. Later that night, Sereth summoned him again. This time, not as a ruler, but as a woman seeking answers. She led him to the Hall of Mirrors, a vast chamber filled with floating crystals that projected visions of the past. The images shimmered wars, coronations, old laws written in glowing runes. "This is where our ancestors forged the law of blood," she said. "A law that says the eldest must own what the younger cannot protect." Ethan studied the floating symbols. "That's not protection," he said quietly. "That's control." Sereth turned to him. "To control is to survive. It's how our empire has lasted 10,000 years. And how many people had to suffer for it?" He asked. She hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the images of old queens and conquered worlds. "Too many," she whispered. Almost to herself, the crystals shifted again, showing a different vision. Sereth as a child, kneeling before her mother, repeating ancient vows. Ethan watched silently, realizing how much her life was built on obedience, not choice. "Do you ever wish you could be free of it?" he asked softly. Her voice broke slightly. "Every day," before either could speak again. The chamber lights dimmed. An alarm began to pulse through the palace. Low and rhythmic, guards shouted in the distance. The sound of engines and energy weapons filled the air. Sarath's expression hardened instantly. "They've come," she said. "Who?" Ethan asked. She looked toward the sky through the mirrored ceiling, where ships of fire were descending. "The Queen's soldiers. She's declared me unfit to rule." She turned to him, her voice steady but urgent. "You have to leave, Ethan, now. She'll kill you just to prove her control." He shook his head. I'm not leaving without you. Serath's eyes softened for a moment, her psychic shield flickering around her like light through water. You don't understand, she whispered. If I go with you, the prophecy will come true. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then maybe it's time it does. For the first time in her life, Serath smiled, not the cold smile of a ruler, but the fragile one of someone who had finally found hope. The palace shook again, explosions echoing from above. She reached out and took his hand, her touch burning with strange energy. Then run with me, human, she said, before our laws destroy us both. Together they sprinted through the glowing corridors as alarms wailed and the empire began to tremble. Behind them, the queen's voice echoed across the telepathic airwaves of Valora. My daughters have betrayed the crown, she thundered, and the human who defied the gods will burn. But Ethan didn't look back, because for the first time since he had arrived on this alien world, he was no longer just surviving. He was fighting for something far greater, something forbidden, something called love. The palace of Vaelora burned with light and thunder. Sirens echoed through every crystal corridor, and the sky above turned red with the glow of descending warships. Ethan Ward ran beside Princess Serath through the collapsing halls, the walls cracking under psychic fire. The air smelled of metal and smoke, and the once peaceful hum of the palace was now a chorus of chaos. Guards rushed from every side, shouting in their alien tongue, their armor reflecting blue light as they aimed energy weapons toward the fleeing pair. Serath's eyes blazed with power. She raised her hand, and the air rippled like water. In an instant, the guards froze mid-step, trapped in a shimmering field of energy. Move, she hissed to Ethan, her voice shaking from the effort. He ran with her down the long glass walkway. Seeing the burning city below, towers crumbling, ships fighting in the clouds. What's happening? He shouted. The queen declared war on her own blood, Serath replied. She thinks destroying me will protect the throne. They reached a gate made of living metal, glowing veins pulsing through it like a heartbeat. Serath touched a hidden symbol, and the door opened to a secret hangar. Inside, a sleek silver vessel floated above the floor, its engines humming quietly. This was built for escape, she said breathlessly. But only in my darkest dreams did I think I'd use it. Before they could board, a sharp voice filled the chamber. Dreams have consequences, my daughter. Both turned, and standing at the gate was the Queen Mother, her robe flowing like smoke, her psychic aura burning with fury. Leora stood beside her, restrained by 2 guards, tears streaming down her face. Mother, please, don't do this, she begged, but the Queen's eyes were locked on Serath. You have broken every sacred vow, she said, her voice cold and echoing. You defied my law, protected a human, and dared to feel for him. Serath stood tall, her chest rising and falling. Yes, I did, she said softly, because I finally saw what you could not. He is not our enemy. The Queen's aura flared brighter, waves of energy cracking the ground beneath them. Then you have chosen your side, she said. Her gaze moved to Ethan, her voice turning sharp as glass. And you, human, brought poison into my bloodline. Ethan took a step forward, despite the power radiating from her. I didn't come here to destroy anyone, he said. I just saved someone who needed help. The Queen raised her hand, psychic fire gathering in her palm. Your help has cost us everything, she hissed. The energy shot forward like a storm of light, but before it struck, Serath leapt in front of him. The blast hit her square in the chest, throwing her across the hangar. Serath! Ethan shouted, running to her side. She lay on the floor, light flickering from the wound across her armor, her breathing shallow. The Queen's voice thundered through the air. You would die for him? Serath looked up weakly, her eyes filled with pain but also peace. I would live for him, she whispered, because he showed me what life truly means. The Queen's expression faltered for a moment, but anger quickly returned. "Then you are no daughter of mine," she said coldly. She gestured to her guards. "Take the human, and end this farce." But before they could move, the ground shook violently. A deep voice echoed through the palace halls, carried by the psychic wind. It was the will of the people, amplified by thousands of minds. The prophecy awakens. They chanted, "The eldest falls, the youngest rises." The queen's face turned pale, her hands trembling as the ancient words returned to haunt her. Leora broke free from her guards and rushed to Ethan, helping him lift Sereth. "Take her," she said desperately. "Go, before the queen destroys you both." Ethan looked at her in disbelief. "What about you?" Leora smiled sadly. "This is my fight too, but she only fears the prophecy, not me." She turned to her mother, tears streaming down her face. "You taught us to rule with strength, but strength without heart is tyranny." The queen raised her arm again, psychic power swirling like a storm around her. But before she could strike, Sereth opened her eyes. Faint light glowing behind them, her voice came out soft but commanding. "Mother, stop." The queen froze, not because of fear, but because Sereth's power was rising. A golden aura erupted around her, brighter than the queen's own. The floating hangar trembled, walls cracking under the force of two powers colliding. Sereth stood, despite her wounds, energy bleeding from her fingertips. "Your reign ends tonight," she said, her voice breaking but unshaken. "I will not let another soul suffer for an ancient lie." The queen screamed. "You would destroy your blood for a human?" Sereth stepped closer, her aura wrapping around Ethan protectively. "No, I would save it," she said quietly, "even if it means burning everything else." The two forces met in a blinding explosion of light. Ethan shielded his eyes as waves of energy tore through the chamber. When the light faded, the queen was on her knees, her crown shattered, her energy fading into the floor. Sereth stood above her, trembling but victorious. The queen's voice was faint. "Broken, the prophecy." It was true. Sereth's eyes softened, tears mixing with light on her face. "It was never a curse, Mother," she whispered. "It was a chance to change." She turned to Ethan, her voice barely a whisper. "Go, before the palace collapses." But Ethan shook his head. "Not without you." Leora ran to them, pressing her hand on her sister's wound, glowing energy flowing into her. "Then none of us leave without each other," she said. The sisters shared one final look, love, forgiveness, and destiny all in one silent moment. As the ceiling began to fall and the city's energy grid overloaded, Sereth touched the ship's console. The escape vessel came to life, hovering above the broken floor. She looked at Ethan, her lips trembling but smiling. "You once said no one owns another soul." He nodded. "And I meant it." She reached for his hand. "Then let's prove it together." The ship blasted out of the collapsing hangar, leaving behind the burning palace of Vaelora. Below, the queen's empire fell into silence. And in that silence, the universe itself seemed to hold its breath, because the law of blood was broken, and a new fate was just beginning. The stars of Valora burned behind them like dying embers. Ethan Ward gripped the controls of the small silver ship as it shot through the storm of debris and fire. Beside him, Princess Sereth lay half-conscious, her armor cracked and glowing faintly. Leora worked frantically at the medical console, trying to stabilize her sister's pulse. Outside, the Queen's fleet roared into pursuit, hundreds of golden warships cutting through the darkness like blades. "Engines overheating," Ethan shouted, his voice shaking. "We can't outrun them for long." Leora looked up, her eyes full of fear. "There's a mining world nearby Draxion. If we reach its shadow, their scanners might lose us." Ethan nodded, pulling the lever forward, the ship diving toward a dark red planet surrounded by rings of dust. Behind them, bursts of plasma fire lit the black sky, each one closer than the last. Sereth stirred, her voice weak but clear. "You should have left me." Ethan glanced at her. "Not happening," her lips curved faintly. "You disobey even death." He smirked despite the chaos. "That's kind of my thing." The ship shook violently as an energy blast grazed their left wing. Alarm screaming. "Shields at 20%, Leora cried. Ethan swore under his breath and pulled the ship lower, skimming the atmosphere of Draxion. Flames streaked across the hull as they entered the thin red clouds. For a few seconds, everything was fire and noise, and then silence. The radar flickered, the enemy signals vanishing. "We did it," Ethan breathed. Leaning back, exhausted, Leora smiled weakly. For now, they landed in the middle of a barren canyon. The sky dim and full of drifting ash. Strange rock spires rose like teeth around them. Glowing faintly in the dark, Ethan helped Sereth down the ramp. Her steps unsteady, her aura dim, he guided her to a sheltered cave where the light of the ship cast long silver shadows. She sat down slowly, her breathing uneven. Leora began to heal her, her hands glowing blue. But the wounds refused to close completely. "It's the psychic backlash," Leora whispered. "She burned too much power fighting the Queen." Sereth opened her eyes. Weak but focused on Ethan. "You shouldn't have come here," she said softly. "Draxion is a slave world. The Queen sends her enemies here to vanish." Ethan looked toward the dark horizon, where faint lights blinked like distant stars. "Then we're in the right place," he said, "because if she's going to find us, she'll have to fight every law she ever made." Hours passed. The air thick with silence and gust, they built a small camp near the crashed edge of their ship. Hiding the engines beneath rock, Ethan sat near the fire, watching the alien flames shift between blue and green. He could feel Sarath's gaze on him, even as she pretended to rest. She had once looked at him like a curiosity, but now her eyes carried something deeper, something fragile. He met her gaze and smiled faintly. "Still think I'm your property?" Sereth looked away, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "No," she whispered. "I think you're my mistake," Ethan grinned. "Then I'm the best mistake you've ever made." The moment was fragile, almost human, but before it could settle, the ground trembled. A low rumble echoed from the distant metal engines, heavy steps and voices. Leora's eyes widened. "Queen's soldiers?" "She must have tracked our energy signature." Sereth tried to stand but staggered. Pain twisting her expression, Ethan caught her, steadying her shoulders. "Stay here, I'll deal with them." She shook her head weakly. "You can't fight them. They're trained killers," he smiled, determination lighting his face. "I've faced worse. I faced your mother." Outside, shadows moved between the rock's-tall armored soldiers with glowing visors, their voices sharp in the cold air. Ethan crouched behind a stone, gripping a salvaged plasma rifle. Leora whispered behind him. "There are too many. Then we make them believe there are more of us," he said, flipping a control switch on his wrist device. A burst of energy spread through the canyon, creating ghostly holograms, dozens of human silhouettes running in different directions. The soldiers shouted, firing wildly into the illusions. Ethan jumped from cover, blasting two of them before rolling behind another rock. Liara sent waves of light through the air, blinding the front line. But the soldiers were relentless, surrounding them fast. One aimed directly at the cave where Sereth hid. Ethan saw it and didn't think. He ran into the open. Taking the blast full in the chest, the impact threw him backward, smoke rising from his armor. "Ethan?" Sereth screamed, her voice breaking. She stumbled out of the cave, rage and grief exploding inside her. Her psychic aura erupted like a storm. Shaking the canyon, the soldiers froze, their weapons turning to ash in their hands. "You will not touch him," she whispered, her voice echoing like thunder. Energy burst from her body in a golden wave, sweeping across the battlefield. The ground cracked, stones lifted into the air, and every soldier fell silent, their armor shattering into dust. When the light faded, she collapsed to her knees beside Ethan. He coughed weakly, the heat still burning across his chest. You really need to stop saving me." Sarath's tears shimmered like silver rain. "Then stop nearly dying." Vaelora knelt beside them, placing her hand on his wound, her voice trembling. "He'll live." Sarath looked at her sister, relief softening her features. "Thank you." Above them, the sky flashed again, this time not from enemy ships, but from a massive explosion far in orbit. The Queen's flagship appeared, black and gold, covering the stars. Vaelora looked up in horror. "She's here herself." Sarath's expression hardened. "Then this ends tonight." She stood slowly, her strength returning, the golden light in her eyes burning once more. Ethan struggled to his feet. "You can't fight her again alone." Sarath turned toward him, her face calm and determined. "I'm not alone anymore." The wind howled through the canyon, the ship engines roaring above like distant thunder. Sarath placed her hand on Ethan's chest, feeling the beat of his heart beneath her palm. "If I fall," she said softly, "promise me you'll live? Promise me you'll tell our story." He shook his head, gripping her hand. "If you fall, I fall with you." She smiled faintly, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "Then maybe the prophecy was never about death," she whispered, "but about choosing love over law." The night sky split open as the Queen's army descended. Sarath's aura ignited once more, bathing the barren world in light. And as Ethan raised his weapon beside her, two figures, one human, one alien, stood together against an empire that had never known mercy. The final battle for freedom had begun. The sky above Draxion burned like a wound. Lightning danced through the red clouds as the Queen's flagship descended, its shadow swallowing the barren planet. Ethan Ward stood beside Sarath on the rocky ridge, his heart pounding like war drums. Her golden aura flickered around her, bright and unstable, like a flame fighting the wind. The Queen's army filled the horizon, hundreds of soldiers in gold armor, weapons glowing, engines roaring. Vaelora moved between them, her silver eyes full of fear, but also courage. "She's brought the entire royal fleet," she said softly. "There's no escape this time." Ethan tightened his grip on his plasma rifle, the barrel cracked and smoking from the last battle. Sarath looked at him, her face calm despite the chaos. "We're not escaping," she said quietly. "We're ending this." The Queen's voice thundered across the sky, amplified by psychic force that made the very air tremble. "Daughter of Vaelora," she called, "you have defied your blood and your crown. Surrender now, and I may yet forgive you." Her ship hovered low, its engines howling like monsters. Sarath stepped forward, her silver hair whipping in the storm. Her voice rose in answer, clear and fearless. "I will not kneel to a throne that stands on chains." The Queen's laughter echoed across the valley, sharp and cruel. "Then you will fall, and the human you love will die screaming beside you." At her signal, the sky erupted, beams of light cut through the air. Explosions tore across the rocks, and the ground shook beneath their feet. Ethan pulled Sarath behind a ledge as fire rained around them. Vaelora raised a shield of blue energy, straining to hold it against the relentless bombardment. "We can't hold this forever," she cried. Sarath looked at Ethan, her expression fierce. "Then we make it count." She pressed her hand to the ground, her psychic power flowing into the rock. The earth glowed gold, runes appearing beneath her feet, old symbols of royal power. "What are you doing?" Ethan shouted. "Something forbidden," she whispered. "Something the law forbids even a queen to touch." The runes spread like fire through the canyon, and the soldiers froze as the ground began to rise. A massive surge of light erupted upward, tearing through the storm and striking the Queen's ship. For the first time, the flagship shook, its golden shields flickering. Inside the ship, the Queen staggered, fury burning in her eyes. "She dares use the royal source," she hissed. "She'll destroy us all." Her hands flared with dark energy as she extended her mind through the psychic network. Linking directly to Sarath's consciousness, the world vanished in a flash of light. Ethan saw Sarath stiffen, her eyes glowing white. Her body caught between worlds. He reached for her, but Vaelora stopped him. "She's inside the Queen's mind now. She's fighting her there, inside the psychic realm." Sarath stood in an endless ocean of silver light. Across from her floated her mother, wrapped in darkness, eyes glowing like dying stars. "You were born to rule, not rebel," the Queen said, her voice echoing from every direction. Sarath's voice trembled. "Ruling without mercy isn't strength, it's fear." The Queen's hand rose, and waves of shadow crashed toward her. Sarath raised her own power in answer. Golden light meeting the dark, the two forces collided, splitting the psychic sea in half. Memories flashed between them, childhood lessons, pain, pride, and every cruel tradition that had shaped their empire. Outside, Ethan watched in agony as Sarath's body shook violently, light spilling from her chest like a living flame. He dropped his weapon and ran to her, gripping her shoulders. "Come on," he whispered. "Don't you dare leave me now." Her pulse was faint, her breathing ragged. In that moment, something ancient awoke inside him, the strange connection that had begun the day he touched her hand. He closed his eyes, pressing his forehead against hers, and somehow he slipped into her mind. The silver ocean surrounded him instantly. He saw Sarath standing alone, her light fading against the Queen's overwhelming power. Without thinking, he ran to her. Grabbing her hand, she gasped in shock. "Ethan?" "How?" He smiled weakly. "Guess I'm bad at following rules." Together, their combined light grew brighter. Gold and human fire blending with alien silver, the Queen screamed, her form shaking as cracks spread through her shadowed shell. "What have you done?" she shouted. "You break the balance." Sarath looked at her mother with tears in her eyes. "No, Mother," she whispered. "We're creating a new one." The world exploded into pure light. The psychic link shattered, and both Sarath and Ethan fell back into their bodies. Gasping for breath, the Queen's ship, now above them, began to collapse inward, its golden hull melting under waves of uncontrolled energy. From the cracks of its surface, millions of sparks burst into the sky, raining light across Drax like falling stars. Vaelora stared upward, tears of awe streaming down her face. "She did it," she whispered. "She ended the law." Sarath rose slowly, her aura fading into soft white. The Queen's voice echoed faintly across the wind, filled with sorrow instead of rage. "My daughter," she whispered, "you have broken the chains of our kind." And then her presence vanished. Carried away by the storm, silence fell. The battlefield was still, the soldiers frozen in disbelief as their psychic commands vanished. The law that had bound them for generations was gone. Sarath turned to the troops, her voice trembling but strong. "No one owns another soul," she said. "Not by birth, not by blood, not by law." Her words spread through every mind, carried by the fading echo of the Queen's power. Across the empire, billions felt the same pulse, the end of control, the beginning of freedom. Ethan smiled, his face bruised and covered in dust. "You did it." Sarath looked at him, her silver eyes soft. "No, we did." Vaelora stepped closer, placing her hand on her sister's shoulder. "Vaelora will never be the same." Sarath nodded. "Good," she said quietly. It's time our world learned to love instead of fear. Days later, a new dawn rose over the rebuilt palace. Sereth stood on a balcony overlooking the shining city. Her crown gone, replaced by a simple silver band. Ethan stood beside her, dressed in alien robes that still didn't quite fit. He looked at the horizon and smiled. "So what now, Empress?" She turned to him, her eyes glowing softly. "No more empires," she said. "Just people learning to live free." He chuckled. "And us?" Her lips curved gently. "You were never mine, Ethan, but you'll always belong with me." The twin suns rose together, their light touching the world that had once been divided by law and fear, now united by a human's courage and an alien's heart. And as their hands intertwined beneath the silver dawn, the prophecy of Vaelora was finally fulfilled. Not in fire or destruction, but in love that rewrote the stars themselves.